All right, ladies and gentlemen, and then look who it is. It's Jonna Spilbor. Jonna Spilbor is here to help talk a little bit right now about the case that we're covering, the Yesenia Sesmas case. That was the grandmother of baby Sophia, who was kidnapped, and that is the mother of the victim, Laura Abarca Noguera. Now, what did we just learn from Guadalupe Noguera? We learned that she had an interaction with the defendant the day before the shooting, and it raises the question, was the defendant really plotting to kill and kidnap, to kill this mother and kidnap her baby the day before, but was kind of deterred because she saw there was another witness there? She saw Guadalupe. Let's talk a little bit more about this case with Jonna Spilbor, our law and crime trial analyst. Now, before we get into Guadalupe, what's going on with the defendant? She's sick. She had chest pains, anxiety Friday. Do you expect that she's going to be here today? How does this happen in the court system?
I have seen this happen before, in my career. I just have a feeling she's been sitting there listening to all this testimony. And between me and you, she does not have a great defense. I don't think it's going to be a great defense. She's probably feeling the heat right now, and it's all getting to her. And there's a possibility when a client is suffering physically because they just can't stand the situation that they're in, the attorneys are probably talk to her all weekend about, do you want to take a deal? Is there an offer on the table? There may not be. The prosecutors might put their hands up and say, we're not striking any deal with her. We got her dead to rights, and we're going to go forward as we have been. So we'll see. I would be very surprised if they just start up today, business as usual, without some sort of conversation between the attorneys and the judge.
Does the jury know that she's not feeling well? Are they allowed to know that? Because of what you just said. If they're like, oh, wait a minute, she's having heart palpitations, it's a sign of her guilt.
That's a good question. They probably don't know why the case ended early, just that it did, that they might know that somebody fell ill. They don't necessarily need to know it's the defendant. And they certainly won't know if there's a conversation this morning. They'll be kept away from that as well until there's some sort of decision made. Or maybe she got herself together over the weekend, and they'll pick right up where they left off.
If she's too sick to be in the courtroom, can they continue without her?
So another great question. Technically, a defendant does not need to be present during a trial as long as they waive their right to be present. So they could continue without her if she gave them permission to do so.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what happens. I want to play some more of the testimony of Guadalupe Noguera, the mother of the victim and the grandmother, I should say, of the other victim, baby Sophia, even though she's okay. Again, we're learning a little bit more about the relationship between Laura, the victim, and Yesenia, the defendant, but we're also learning a little bit how this whole shooting took place. Let's play a little bit more of her testimony, and then John and I are going to dissect what we heard and what you should take from it. Take a look. Okay, welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We're trying to analyze the Yesenia Sesmas case, this woman who is on trial for the murder of Laura Abarca Noguera, a young mother, and the kidnapping of her baby, 6-day-old baby Sophia. That was Guadalupe Noguera. That is the mother of the victim and the grandmother of the other victim, I should say, baby Sophia. Now, I want to bring back in Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Are you getting the flavor from her testimony that Yesenia was mapping out this crime days before? I mean, this conversation about that she had with Yesenia was before the shooting. And are you getting that flavor?
I'm getting that flavor. I'm getting really three things from this witness's testimony. Essentially, number one, that the defendant was what I call casing the joint, like trying to set up her opportunity to commit this crime probably the day before, but sort of assessing the situation at the apartment, number one. Number two, she essentially identifies the defendant, not that there's a question, but she does provide identity information about the defendant. And three, and maybe even the most important, is she sets up the scene that her daughter was in no way, shape, or form intending to give this child away. She was a young mother. She was happy to be a young mother. She was she had all the supplies needed to be a mother for her newborn baby. She heard nothing of any deal where she was going to give the child up for this, kind of a strange adoption to this other person. So she's pivotal. Like, she kind of puts that all together out of one witness's mouth. She's a good witness.
I mean, a great witness, considering the fact that the defense is kind of saying, well, how do we know this is a calculated, intentional, premeditated murder? Maybe they had an argument in the apartment. But there's so much evidence to point to the fact that that's not the case.
Right.
Let's point to the fact that if you look at the actual body, and we've shown it here on Law and Crime because we saw the body cam footage of one of the responding officers and also crime scene photos, Laura has a shot right through the center of her forehead, which indicates, you know, a close-range weapon. And then also there's no blood on the inside of her forearms, which says there's no struggle.
Right.
Do you think the jury's looking at this and saying, well, perhaps this is a closed case of premeditated murder, or maybe they're saying we really can't tell. Maybe there was a struggle. Maybe the gun did go off as an accident, you know?
You know, just so I'm a gun owner, and you have to, in order for a gun to go off accidentally, you have to be more than careless. But I think it's very strange to float this accident theory when you have a shot point blank to the forehead. If it were an accident, the gun, and you can still die from, obviously, from an accidental gunshot, but is it going to be point blank to the forehead, like literally right between your eyes, or is it going to be someplace else on the body because it was an accidental shooting and, you know, maybe during a struggle, even though there's very little evidence that there was a struggle. So I think that's why I said earlier, this is a weak defense. There are so many holes you can poke in the theory of defense, technically and otherwise, that I just don't think the jury's going to buy it.
Well, it's chilling testimony from Guadalupe Noguera, especially when you hear that she's testifying that Yesenia knew Laura was going to be alone the day of the shooting, and she did this offhanded comment, "Oh, maybe I'll stop by tomorrow." Well, when she allegedly stopped by the next day, that's when all of this happened. We're going to play some more of her testimony right now. This is when the shooting actually takes place, and how Guadalupe Noguera responded to this. But what John and I are going to talk about after is if Yesenia Sesmas is the person who committed these crimes, why didn't she try to cover it up? Why didn't she do more to say that she wasn't the killer or wasn't the kidnapper? We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Let's play you some more of the testimony of Guadalupe Noguera. That's some of the emotional testimony, from Guadalupe Noguera, the mother of the victim in this case, as well as the grandmother of, you could say, the other victim in this case. So we're talking about Yesenia Sesmas, a woman who is on trial for the murder of Laura Abarca Noguera. So that is the daughter of the woman that you were just hearing, as well as the kidnapping of 6-day-old baby Sophia. Now that baby is okay, but in a sense she is a victim. She is a kidnapping victim, and that is the grandmother. And that conversation that was just being played in court, that testimony was about the idea that how could you say that my daughter wanted to give up her baby to the defendant? They never had any kind of agreement where she was going to give up this baby. But that is one avenue that the defense is going, that perhaps they had some sort of agreement and it was a conversation gone bad that resulted in a shooting. Let's talk a little bit more about that right now with Jonna Spilbor.
Yeah.
As the defense tries to mount a defense,
right,
my biggest question is, if Yesenia is the person that did this, she was found with the murder weapon and she was found with the baby. Why was there absolutely no attempt to try to cover this up?
Well, I don't think this defendant is the sharpest tool in the shed, right? In fact, I mean, what the jury, I think we'll find out later on, is she was motivated because she herself lost a baby. Now, maybe that did something to her emotionally and mentally, and if she's got any defense at all, I think that the defense counsel needs to play on that. Maybe she just went nuts, for lack of a better word, right? She wanted this baby so bad. That's what motivated her to hatch this plan to kidnap. But it does not explain away the murder of this young mother. And you'll notice the defense does not do any cross-examination of this particular witness, which I think on one hand is very smart. On the other, they're not doing their client a favor.
What could they have asked her?
They're not explaining anything.
What should they have asked her that might have helped their client?
Well, and maybe that's just it. Maybe they figured there were no questions that they could ask of this poor woman. You're right, she's got two victims here, her own daughter and her granddaughter. Fortunately, her granddaughter is okay. There was nothing they could ask her that was going to promote their theory of defense, unless they were going to attack the identification of the defendant, but I think that was pretty clear during the direct examination.
We're showing photos. That is from the baby shower of the defendant. So again, as Jonna said, she was pregnant. She had a miscarriage, but she still appeared pregnant. She still had a baby bump. And as crazy as this is, the prosecution says that she's tried to take this baby, or she took this baby and passed it off as her own. Her family members didn't know. They thought that this was the baby. I mean, this is what it is. This is how it all went down. And miraculously, we talked about it earlier, when they raided the house and rescued baby Sophia, it's believed the family members had no idea what was going on. So if you're related to Sesmas, what do you think about this?
I think they have to be full of baloney. I don't think she could successfully hide a miscarriage when she was that far along. And then all of a sudden, what, did the stork bring this baby? Like, how all of a sudden did she get this baby if she didn't go to the hospital to have it? Now, I think she's claiming she had it at home, which I guess could have happened, but I don't know how that would happen without anybody knowing it.
I mean, it's the details get stranger and stranger of this case.
I almost feel sorry for the defense attorneys in this case, because it just doesn't seem like a plausible theory of defense. It just doesn't.
Well, they seem to be just saying, let's go to the legal definitions. What is intentional? What is reckless? Perhaps if you look at the exact definitions, the state can't prove that. Yeah. We'll have to see, Jonna. We'll have to see. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, there's a lot more to discuss in this case, including we're also waiting for a live feed in our other case out of North Carolina, the Wallace Bradsher case, a district attorney who faces a lot of different counts in connection with hiring his another district attorney's wife for a no-show job. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but we have a lot more to discuss in the Yesenia Sesmas case. We'll be right back. That was Dr. Scott Kipper, the medical examiner, testifying in the Yesenia Sesmas case, a woman who is on trial for the murder of Laura Abarco Nogueta and the kidnapping of her baby. So what did we just learn from the medical examiner? Let's bring back in Jonna Spilbor, Law and Crime trial analyst. What did we learn from the medical examiner and the overall theory of this case? Well,
now we've just debunked the defense theory that the gun went off accidentally, because we have a man who examined her corpse and said, basically, no other wounds to any other part of her body except for the bullet to the brain. No defensive wounds, no damage to any organs, not like she fell down the stairs or got into a fisticuffs with the defendant here. So it really was a point-blank shot to the head that killed her.
Couldn't somebody do that shot, or maybe there was a struggle and manipulated the crime scene in a way? Made it look like a certain way.
All right, so hold on a second. In the jury's minds, right now they have enough information to show that we have a defendant that had opportunity, maybe they don't know about the motive yet, but for the opening statements, opportunity and motive, and was seen at the scene the day before, identified by a credible witness. We've got a medical examiner who shows one gunshot to the head. The jury's got to be saying to itself, if the defendant didn't do it, who did? I mean, it would have to be somebody associated with this defendant. And if that's the case, then the defendant should stand up and say, I know who did it. It wasn't me. It was so-and-so. And again, the theory is not, the defense theory is not yet holding water.
So the evidence seems pretty strong. And we talked about earlier that the murder weapon and the baby were found with Yesenia Sesmas.
Hello.
Why is this going to trial?
Well, a couple of reasons. Cases usually go to trial when there's been absolutely no attempt to plea bargain with the prosecution. They could have such a strong case that they don't want to plea bargain in this instance. Or it goes to trial when the case is so strong against your client that you hope that somebody screws up, that you can appeal to one juror to not be able to make a decision on all of the counts, so that you get a hung jury, at least partial. I'm guessing that is why they actually went to trial.
Because the trial is still a gamble. It's still a gamble.
Always a gamble.
It's always a gamble, and you don't know. If, like you said, if someone makes a procedural error, that could be grounds for an appeal.
For an appeal?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. We want to play a little bit more of the testimony of Dr. Scott Kipper, the medical examiner. Again, this testimony is so crucial because it explains the wounds suffered by Laura Abarco Nogueta, and it gives you an indication about the intent of the killer. Take a look. Okay, so what we just learned from Dr. Scott Kipper, the medical examiner, was that this gun that was used to kill Laura Barker Noguera was maybe pressed up right against her forehead. It almost appeared to be a contact wound, which would suggest that this is not an accident or a struggle, but was a cold-blooded murder. Let's bring back in, Law&Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. I mean, the testimony from this medical examiner keeps getting worse and worse and worse for the defense.
Just gonna say that. I don't know how anybody can sit there with a straight face. There's no way that you can basically touch a gun to somebody's forehead and then say that it went off accidentally. You know, unless they really want the jury to believe that she was just trying to, I don't know, scare her with her finger on the trigger and the gun pressed up against her forehead, where an accident is most certainly going to kill her. I mean, it just doesn't fly, Jesse. I don't get it. It doesn't fly.
Doesn't the defense need to put on a gun expert and say, hey, look, well, you know, maybe the gun could go off in this way, at least provide some sort of other scenario for the jury?
The only way a gun goes off like that is if you have your finger on the trigger and you pull it. And to me, that is completely incongruent with the accident theory. I cannot wait for the prosecution's case to complete so we can see where the defense is actually planning to go with this, because right now it doesn't make any sense. And I'm sure the jury's confused too.
One of the things that we know and the jury doesn't know as of yet is that this is not the first time Yesenia Sesmas has been accused of trying to kidnap a baby, right? What did we learn about her?
And I don't know if the jury is going to find out about this. So about 4 months prior to this murder and kidnap, this very defendant had taken a page out of her own playbook and tried it previous. Except fortunately, at that time, she was going to steal somebody else's baby. But fortunately, that did not end in a murder. It did end in her getting incarcerated on that kidnapping charge. However, she was able to post bail, got out of jail, and that's when this case happened.
Adriana Portillo says that she and her young daughters and her unborn baby were almost the first victims of Yesenia Sesmas. She actually had to fight her off in this bizarre kidnapping attempt. I encourage everyone to read a little bit more about it, because it is strange in the tale of Yesenia Sesmas. We are waiting for a live feed in the courtroom. Look, we see the camera up. We see the seal. We are waiting to go live. It appears that we will be live in this case, so as soon as we have that feed, we'll make sure to go to it. In the meantime, let's continue more with the testimony of Dr. Scott Kipper, the medical examiner, explaining how Laura Barker died and what this means for Yesenia Sesmas. Take a look. Okay, there was an important aspect in the testimony of Dr. Scott Kipper, the medical examiner, that I want to touch upon right now with Jonna Spilbor. Again, we're talking about the Yesenia Sesmas case, this woman who's on trial for the murder of Laura Barker Noguera and the kidnapping of her baby girl. Why does it matter whether she died instantaneously or took her some more time to die? Why does that matter? Well,
I don't know. I mean, in the criminal context, it really doesn't matter that much, except I think it's just another little leg in the theory that this was no accident, because the gunshot was so close. It was dead on, right in the middle of her brain. And that way, once she was shot, she also wouldn't have an opportunity to fight back, because she was instantaneously unconscious.
Could it also be that, hey, listen, if she didn't die immediately and there was a pulse or indicated that she was alive, Yesenia Sesmas didn't call 911. She didn't try to save her. So it matters for the jury, I guess, in that sense?
Well, I guess it matters a little bit, because that's not the be-all, end-all. Obviously, she never called 911. She took the baby. She tried to pass the baby off as her own. She was going to try to get away with this for the rest of her life. So to say that this was an accidental shooting, but she didn't do anything to help this woman, even if the victim had died instantly and it was an accident, if you're a decent person, you call 911 and say, oh my God, I just accidentally shot somebody. She didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take another break, but when we come back, we're going to play some more of the testimony, some new testimony from Lacey Webb, a neighbor of the victim, talking about what she saw during this course of events. But also, I'm going to ask Jonna the million-dollar question. If Yesenia Sesmas, feels well and is not suffering from chest pains or anxiety, will she take the stand? We'll talk about that more after this short break. Welcome back, everybody. That was the testimony of Lacey Webb, a neighbor of the victim in the Yesenia Sesmas case. Let's talk again with Jonna Spilbor. So I'm always curious when I hear this testimony from witnesses who were right there during the course of events. And based upon what Lacey Webb says, it seems like she saw Yesenia Sesmas right there at the crime scene, that they made eye contact. When you interview witnesses for the first time, who are either right there at a crime scene, an horrific crime scene such as this, what is that like, interviewing them and having them testify?
Well, it's interesting because let's take this witness, for example. She probably didn't know that she was in the middle of a crime scene when she happened upon this defendant. You don't know what's going on, right? She saw her appearing outside the door to her, but you can't put all of the pieces together yet. So what happens is, somebody experiences something like that. Like, she passes by the door, she makes eye contact. Then someone sits her down to say, now we want to interview you about this because what you witnessed was actually a piece of a crime. Now, because we're human beings, we go back and we try to fill in some blanks, I think, which cannot always be helpful to the person who's doing the interviewing.
You mean it's not accurate? You sometimes fill in details.
It could end up not being accurate, and then that leaves that witness up to attack from the other side, obviously.
Because isn't there the danger that if you're trying to fill in the gaps and you know who the suspect is, or the defendant in this case, you try to say, wait a minute, yeah, I did see that person. Yes, that's who I saw. Yeah, that's who I saw.
So you could have a misidentification. There are other pieces to the puzzle that she could have formulated later. And listen, this is all innocent. This is just human nature. It's not like she's trying to do it. Like, for example, and I don't know if we got there or we'll get there, but she had testified previously when the prosecution asked her a question, like, what did she look like when she was looking at you? And she filled in a blank for the jury and said, like, I shouldn't have been there, or like, she didn't want me to be there, something like that.
We're going to play you her testimony right now. This is when she says it looked like she wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's play you some more of her testimony right now. We are waiting for the courtroom feed. I see we see the courtroom feed, just nothing started yet. Trial hasn't started, so stay tuned. We will be live in that courtroom. We'll have an update for you, but this is a continuation of the testimony of Lacey Webb. Let's go. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We're covering the Yesenia Sesmas case out of Kansas, a woman who is on trial for the murder of a young mother and the abduction of her baby girl. That was the testimony of Lacey Webb, a neighbor of the victim. There was an interesting moment there, and I want to touch upon that a little bit more, because this woman lived next door to the victim, and we knew from earlier testimony that the victim and the defendant knew each other for about 8 years. They worked together, but she really never saw Yesenia there. And that raises some very interesting things in this case. Let's bring back Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, what do you think about that?
So a couple of things come to mind. Number one, they probably weren't close friends, because you can have coworkers that you're not close with, but if they worked together for that long, and this neighbor had never seen Yesenia Sesmas there ever before, that tells me two things. They weren't that friendly, number one, and number two, are you really going to be arranging to give your baby up for some sort of like illegal adoption without meeting with the person who's going to mother that child at least a few times beforehand? I think that's very curious.
Well, let's talk about that. So the theory put forward is that perhaps Laura, the victim, and the defendant had an arrangement where Laura would give up her baby, right? That seems to be what was the sense was. But when you look at Laura's apartment, there's all baby clothes, baby food, crib, everything you need for a newborn. And as you just said, there was never, where were these meetings? Who knew about this?
When did they discuss it? Because I would imagine that if you have a child that you're going to give to somebody else to raise, you're going to talk about it a little bit beforehand, I think. So, and again, it's almost now at this point that the defense theory is working against them, not for them.
You make a great point. Now, what we have for you right now, ladies and gentlemen, that is a live feed into the Yesenia Sesmas case. It appears the defendant is okay. Remember, she was suffering from chest pains and anxiety last week. She had to even be hospitalized. She's in the courtroom right now. We're waiting for the live courtroom feed to begin. I mean, we're waiting for trial to really begin, but that's her. She appears to be okay, Jonna.
Yeah, I guess she got over her panic attack on Friday, and which also begs another question, Jesse. I'm dying to know whether this defendant is going to take the stand and testify. I would almost think she would have to, but if you can't cut it while you're sitting there watching events unfold, she's going to have a very difficult time if she has to take the stand.
Yeah.
Plus, her prior bad act will most likely come in only if she takes the stand.
You're talking, of course, about that attempted kidnapping
Yes.
of another mother's children.
Yes.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll hopefully jump back into that courtroom because we don't want you to miss a thing in this case out of Kansas. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We are covering the Yesenia Sesmas case out of Kansas. That is a live feed into that courtroom. The woman in the white there sitting in the chair is the defendant. She was suffering chest pains, anxiety last week. She was hospitalized, but she's appears to be okay now, at least good enough to be in the courtroom. That's her defense attorney there gathering some documents. Yesenia Sesmas is on trial for the murder of Laura Abarca Nogueta and the kidnapping of her baby girl. For anybody just joining us, that baby girl is okay. She was rescued from Yesenia Sesmas. But there's some interesting parts about this case in all different angles. But I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor because one of the interesting things about this, or one of the things that raises a lot of questions, is she wasn't supposed to be here. She's an illegal immigrant, right?
Yeah, so that adds another element to it. And in fact, so when you go back to her prior kidnapping, the kidnapping for which she was incarcerated, but she was able to bail herself out, there was an issue there because ICE apparently wasn't called, which is why she was allowed to actually bail out, leave that facility, and then it was shortly thereafter that this crime was committed.
Because she was arrested in connection with the almost kidnapping, the potential kidnapping of some other children. But here's the question. So if she was in custody and then ICE was alerted, what would have happened to her?
So if ICE were able to get a warrant or a detainer, they could have held her in a federal facility so that she would not be out among, society. And had that happened, we can assume then she wouldn't have had the opportunity to commit this heinous crime.
Well, if that is allegedly commit this crime, because she's still on trial. But if that is true, that she is the killer, one person who would really wish that ICE came to the rescue and made sure that she was not let public, it was Manuel Antonio Gonzalez. This is the boyfriend of Laura Abarca Nogueta and the father of baby Sophia. We talk so much about who's going to explain to baby Sophia when she grows up what happened to her mother. It's likely that it's Manuel. He testified earlier in this case. Let's play you some of his testimony about what it was like when he realized he was going to be a father. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and that was the testimony of Joseph Daniff from the FBI task force. And this is in the Yesenia Sesmas case, a woman who was charged with the murder of Laura Abarca Nogueta and the kidnapping of her young baby, 6-day-old baby Sophia. What we just learned was how cell phone evidence becomes pivotal in these kinds of cases. Let's bring back on Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. So what did we learn? We learned something interesting, that the cell phone from Yesenia Sesmas was used to track her location, correct?
Yeah, so this is actually a little bit of dry testimony, but what we're going through here is how they were able to connect the dots from a truck essentially that they saw at the scene of the crime all the way to Yesenia's location in another state. And they did that via finding her phone number, which was connected to this truck on social media, and then pinging, watching the cell towers ping off that phone number to her ultimate location.
It's amazing how technology is used in today's day and age to help track people in these kinds of cases.
Yep.
We have a new witness on the stand. Let's listen in live.